Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing, a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. This is episode 75. Writing with Emotion, How the Book Came About. I've been sharing with you that I've written a book that's coming out very, very soon. It's called Writing with Emotion, and it summarizes the 35-lesson course that I've been teaching on YouTube for the past 35 weeks, 2/3 of a year. And I wanted to share with you the origins of the information that's presented in that book and how the book came about. The book had its first origins in a weekend visit that I paid to a precious niece. I have several nieces and nephews, but this niece in particular I was visiting, and she was always my writer gal. She always wanted to write, and now she was mother of 3 young boys and homeschooling them, keeping house and a small farm, and she put her writing aside. And sadly, too, she felt that she simply didn't have the time available to write. I tried to talk her into just, put the fragments together. It'll add up over time. And sadly, she explained why that wouldn't work. And that left me kind of sad. So I'd taken the train up, and so on my train trip back, I was trying to think of how could I come about with a system that would help her. And I felt so frustrated. And it made me think back to the only other time I could think of in my life when I had felt that much frustration. In fact, the memory brought back a scene where I was sitting on the floor of the ladies' room at Apple Computer. Well, it wasn't like any big glorious headquarters of Apple. This was in the days just before the release of the Macintosh computer, the first Macintosh. In 1984 was the release date. And before that release, probably I think a dozen systems, I don't have an exact memory or knowledge really, had development systems had been handed out to various software developers so that they could prepare their software products so that on the release date of the Mac there would be a dozen programs that you could buy that would run on the Macintosh. Well, my husband and I had applied for one of those machines. We had a chess program called Sargon that had had quite a bit of success on the Apple II, and we thought it would be nice to have it also out on the Macintosh. Well, we'd been turned down. I guess we weren't big enough potatoes. Others had gotten their machines, and we set the thought aside. Well, about halfway through the pre-release period, I got a call from Guy Kawasaki saying, "You guys still want to do that development?" Oh, yeah. Yes, we did. Well, it turns out someone had dropped out, and we were able to get their development system. So we set about creating our chess program on that machine. Dan took on the task of converting the code from 6502 assembly language to 68,000 assembly language, no small task. And I took on the side of creating the user interface in the new graphic-oriented interface with this funny thing. A mouse? A little piece of plastic that you moved on the desktop? What a strange way of having an interface. Well, as it got close to the release date of the Macintosh, Apple conducted something that they called Mac University. The idea was to bring us, all the developers, up to Apple and be able to work on site and get the final problems ironed out with our programs so that they'd be ready on the release date. they had 2 different sessions of Mac University. The big guys, Microsoft was one of them, were in the first group, and I was in the second group. And we were gathered. It wasn't any big, glorious a center where we were. It was kind of more like a bungalow outbuilding. We were the only ones in the little building, and it was quite a pleasant few days. They served us breakfast of fruit and muffins each morning, and it was a very concentrated environment in which to work. And it got down to the last day and the last assignment of our program. We were supposed to do something called identifying all the objects on the heap. Well, without getting too technical, let me just say it was a heck of a job. And I had narrowed it down to the point where I only had 2 objects left that I could not identify. And I struggled and struggled and struggled and struggled, and my frustration just grew and grew, and it was getting late. It was the last day, and it was starting to push towards dinner time, so I was starting to feel that I was going to run headlong into failure. But I pushed, and at one point it just got to the point where tears were starting to form, and I just scooted off to the ladies' room, went inside, closed the door. I was the only woman in the building, so I was fairly safe at that, and I just crumpled down on the floor and just sobbed. I just let all the frustration out, all the tears out, and when that was over with, I got up, washed my face, went back to my cubicle, and by golly, I found the last 2 objects. Well, no sooner had I finished that than Steve Jobs ducked into my cubicle, ducked his head in and said, "Hey, you coming to dinner?" He was taking all of the developers to the local vegetarian restaurant for dinner. And I said, "Yeah, I will. I finally found the last 2 objects on the heap. Otherwise, I would have stayed to work on it." And he congratulated me, paid me a compliment, and he told me that of both sessions of Mac University, I was the only person to identify all the objects on the heap. Well, that turned out to be a little more significant than I would have thought at the time. Well, for one thing, I didn't realize that Steve Jobs didn't hand out compliments routinely, so it didn't seem a particularly unusual thing for me at the time. But the bigger issue was that it also turned out that of both sessions of Mac University and of all the pre-release Macintoshes that went out, only our Sargon chess program was actually ready to go on the day the Macintosh came out. Not many people know that the birthplace of Excel was the Macintosh. And on that day, it was supposed to have been Mac Write, Mac Paint, and Excel that were ready on the first day. Nope. It was Mac Write, Mac Paint, and Sargon. Oh well. But it was the frustration that I was locking in on and realizing that I hadn't really faced in my life that many barriers or obstacles that just would not crack by dint of effort. And this one was really, really bothering me. And it actually, in point of fact, it took from August clear through till April of the following year before I was able to crack that nut, solve that problem. And so I think right now I'll leave that story at that. And tomorrow I'll pick up the story and tell you how individual threads started coming together to form the solution. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.